Hello, and welcome to another episode of Never Go Against the Family. We're coming to you live from the University of Northern Iowa Family Business Center in Cedar Falls, Iowa. We follow family businesses and topics that help your family business sustain itself. In this episode, Dan talks to Michael Klein. Michael is the author of Trapped in the Family Business, a practical guide to uncovering and managing this hidden dilemma. He has 20 years of experience as a workplace consultant and advisor to individuals and organizations. Keep listening to hear his perspectives from working directly with families like yours.
Are you from a family-owned business?
I'm not, no.
Okay.
I just fell into the work and have been doing it for 20 years now. Yeah.
Because of your work in therapy or why did you fall into it?
Uh I initially wanted to be a clinical psychologist, and I went through and got my doctorate, but about halfway through I decided that, and I was lucky because the program that I went to had an organizational psych track, and I ended up crossing over. Even though I graduated with my clinical doctorate, I really enjoyed the organizational work and decided that's what I was going to do. So I've never actually been a licensed therapist. I mean, I have training background in it,
Yeah.
but even during grad school, I was doing HR and training and development, and did that for a number of years, and then eventually went out on my own.
So then you're interacting with family-owned companies at one point or time along there, doing different things and
It's
see this cottage industry that it kind of is, the whole working with family-owned companies and specialized.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
I had a bunch of people suggest to me, not a bunch, a few suggest to me when I went on my own. They're like, "Oh, you should look into family-owned businesses," because I'd been working in business, but also had my clinical training, even though again it was just training. I didn't
Yeah.
practice. And at first I was like, well, I don't really know anything about family businesses, and I really hadn't been exposed to it. And I had a financial advisor refer a client to me. That was my first family business client. And I really got just fascinated with how people end up working with families and how complicated it is, and how it's easy to kind of lose yourself, and how it is so different than working with strangers, right? Or at least with people who aren't related to you.
Yeah.
So that really
Yeah.
got me hooked.
What kinds of things have you learned about this space that makes you want to stay in it?
I appreciate the question. And let me also say, I'm a fan of your podcast because you have this wonderful mix of people who are in family businesses and people who serve family businesses from all sorts of different professions. And to me, it's kind of a mirror of how complicated it is to be in a family business. You need, and there's tremendous benefit from peer support and peer contact. And so having those guests on here that have lived the family business experience, I think is, and I know from speaking to clients and just in general, knowing that other people have lived through what you're going through is a tremendous relief. And also it can give you hope
Yeah.
and make you feel a lot less crazy, that it's not
Yeah.
all, you're not the only one that's ever gone through this. So that's huge. But then on the other side, you've got all these advisors, financial advisors, family business consultants, coaches, folks that specialize in succession planning, right? You've got lawyers, you've got accountants. I mean, there's so much to consider. So I really do appreciate, and I'm so glad that you've set up the podcast in the way that you have.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we try to, like you said, infuse all lenses. And I think the peer part of it is always the biggest one, us as a center. That's what I think that's the most cathartic for our clients is I'm not the only one, or, oh geez, those people are more messed up than we are even, or those two big takeaways I think are big, and people just like to know that where they're headed, somebody else has already gone and they came through the other side with all their limbs attached, and whatever, they're not in prison type of thing. So, so you're in this space that you didn't otherwise know existed. Like, what types of takeaways have you taken from just that part of the experience so far?
One of the hooks for me
Yeah.
early on, and it's really continued since I've been in this space, is that when you grow up in a family business, at least in my experience, there's a far greater likelihood that the boundaries between who you are as an individual, what you want, what your needs and desires are, get blurred with what the family needs and what the business needs. And so my very first family business client was in that exact situation, 10 years in the business, completely frustrated, having his Jerry Springer moments with his brother because they both bought the business from their parents.
Okay.
And after talking to him briefly and doing some assessment work with him, I use all sorts of self assessments, whether they're values or interests or personality or emotional intelligence.
Yep.
What we both realized was that he was not interested or cut out to be a business owner or a manager, and wasn't particularly interested even in the industry that he was in. But it was so hard for him to even broach the topic with his brother or with his parents because he felt this tremendous weight and burden to serve the family, to work with his brother, to carry on his parents' legacy. And so for me, this continues to be an issue. Family business consulting is this tremendous industry. And by and large, family business consultants want to work with the whole system. And I think that's critical. For me, the problem is, it was for this client, it is for many of my clients, they still need their own person. They still need, one of my clients actually used this term. I'm not necessarily a boxing fan or know much about it, but they said I'm their corner man, which is the person who stands
Yeah.
in the corner of the ring, right? And supports them and coaches them, prepares them for the fight, but is also kind of there during the fight. Not to say all family businesses are fighting, but a lot of them are. So to me, the big takeaway is that in so many family businesses, when you've grown up in it, the boundaries are so blurry that you need somebody to help you sort through, again, what do you want? Who are you? And what do you want in the context of the greater family and of the business? My concern continues to be, and actually it's grown, because family business consulting firms now often employ individual coaching as part of their work. So they may have one person or a pair of people that work with the whole system,
Yeah.
and either those same people or other people that coach individuals in the family. To me, those two really need to be separated, because for people to feel really comfortable in sharing, yes, their deepest, darkest secrets, but also their feelings about family members, they need to feel like it's not going to get back to the family without their consent or knowledge, and that it doesn't bleed over. So my concern, like I said, has been and continues to be that people who work with their family have their own support that is separate.
Yeah. Separation of church and state type of thing there.
100%.
Okay. I feel like I know families who don't, who have because there's a lot of folks that get into therapeutic types of roles and then eventually specialize into this space. Like that's a definite career path, and I see lots of folks that do that, and I could totally see that. I mean, I don't have that background, but they're running the family meeting, they're facilitating the board meeting, they're facilitating the succession planning project at the holistic level, and then they're also meeting with little Jimmy or Sally every couple of weeks to try to, help them get shit straight or whatever it is. And I would think it'd be only human nature that would bleed, or that there would be some overlapping or some ways that you're now as a facilitator going to be kind of taking conversations or looking out for individuals that have certain things that they've shared with you, and that could get messy. I could see that. I'm glad you
Yeah,
kind
absolutely. I think from the facilitator perspective, you're absolutely right that stuff, even if you try really hard to keep them separate, it's if you have knowledge of certain things, it's really hard to not let that impact the work that you're doing with the system. Now, I'm not saying that those systems people don't need to interview individuals and don't need to understand individuals, but in terms of ongoing coaching through a process like that, I do think your reference to separation of church and state makes a lot of sense. But again, I think also for family business members to feel like they can say whatever they want about their family to this person, and it will not get back to anybody unless they decide to communicate it back to the family. And when I still do some corporate work, but even in those situations, it's really important to me that if I'm working through a human resources department, that there is a degree of confidentiality, because if I'm coaching somebody in an organization, they need to feel like HR isn't sitting in the room with us. In order for them to really engage in the process and be really truthful, there needs to be a very strong degree of trust. And I think the basis of that is confidentiality.
Of all the topics you could write about from a family business perspective, some of them you've already mentioned here, why that one?
That first family business client that I had, when I started learning about his situation and how complicated it was, I immediately thought, well, he needs resources. He needs help beyond me to know that he's not alone.
Yeah.
And to know that this is manageable. And I searched and searched and searched, and there was nothing that spoke specifically to, guess what? You're not the only person to feel trapped in your family business, and it can be understood. And there are ways to think about it, and you can make changes, and you can get help. So it really just came out of, I think, like a lot of one-off authors will tell you, or even people who make, other media, they wanted this to be in existence. And since it wasn't in existence, they had to do it themselves. So that's really what it came out of. I hadn't anticipated being an author, really, but this client needed that. And so I started doing research and interviewing. I was very lucky to have a family business center close to where I'm located here in Western Mass, which unfortunately shut its doors during COVID and hasn't reopened. But I got to meet a lot of people through that family business center, did a bunch of interviews, got even deeper and more fascinated by this topic of how do people end up feeling trapped in this thing that can be a wonderful opportunity. What goes on there? How do you end up in this situation that my first client did? And I've learned over the years that it's far from unique. It's incredibly common. In fact, one person I interviewed who had been a family business consultant for 20 years, when I asked him if he could just give me a sense of, and I think I wrote about this in the book, if he can give me a sense of, over his 20 years, how many people has he worked with who felt at some point trapped in their family business?
Yep.
His response was, hard to put an exact number on it, but he thinks somewhere between 99 and 100%.
Okay. I was going to say, yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Which is absolutely true, I think, right? I mean, when things are going great and there's high cotton and you're getting along, that's maybe that, hopefully that's that joyous side of being part of that legacy, of being part of that family. But then either macro environmental things going on with the business or the family, things out of your control potentially, then all of a sudden you've got that trapped feeling. So when you work with people, or when you consult with families or individuals, probably more so, on that trapped feeling, is there a couple of little coaching points you can give us today that you would tell little Jimmy Jr., Sally Jr. that, ask yourself these questions to maybe help you get, I don't even know if it's a fork in the road where you're like, well, I'm going to get into the family business and I can either feel trapped and this sucks, or I can feel, oh, this is awesome. I'm guessing it's more of a path that meanders between both of those issues, but maybe not. And like, are there some things that you can ask yourself, you can self-coach yourself a little bit on to think through that?
One of my goals in writing the book was to do exactly that. The first part of it explains what I learned in terms of all the reasons that people end up feeling trapped, obligation to family, guilt. There's a certain ease and comfort in just sliding right into the family business that you grew up in. Uh, you don't have to put together a resume, go on job interviews. There's often just an opportunity waiting for you. It can be very seductive in terms of future ownership and profit sharing. So it could also happen by accident. A parent becomes incapacitated or dies, and suddenly nobody else is around, and you need to step in, even though you never planned it. These are all things that, since writing the book and doing the research, I've encountered with clients. So that's the first portion of the book. But really, I think, and what I've heard from people, it gives you a sense of, again, you're not the only one. You're not crazy. It's incredibly
Yeah.
common, and it can be understood. And then after that, I talk about how you can do exactly what you're asking, which is coach yourself and try to figure this out. And what I lay out is a whole series of choices that people have, which is to think through things like, what's important to you?
Yeah.
What relationships matter to you? Who do you want to talk to about it? Are there advisors or coaches that you can seek out? And I provide lists of resources in the book as well. For me, one of the most important things that folks can do, especially if they haven't had the opportunity to do this before, is go through some kind of assessment process with a professional to really look objectively at who they are, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, their level of emotional intelligence, their values, their interests, so they can make an objective decision about either joining or staying or exiting the business. So
Okay, great. So I like to just, I like the do-it-yourself model, but I realize it doesn't happen all the time. But any suggested exams, surveys, assessments, whatever you call them, that you would hope they take with whoever they're working with, or however they do it?
most of the assessments that I use tend to be pretty rigorous. I think in the past decade, there's been an explosion of interest in self-assessment tools. And I hate to say you get what you pay for, but putting together a rigorous tool requires a lot of time and effort and money. And so
Sure.
vendors and test publishers who sell these things have invested a lot of time and money into their development. So the tools that I use are ones that require some kind of training or certification. So I don't really, unfortunately, have any great suggestions for
No, that's
the
fine. What are the
do-it-yourself
ones that
ones.
you
Yeah.
love that do require that training? Because I'm
Oh,
familiar with a couple of basic, strengths finder type things, but maybe there's some more specific or more robust tools, it sounds like, that I think our audience probably wouldn't even be aware of, and then they could go and search that kind of thing out.
sure. Yeah. And you can actually, if there is a specific tool you're interested in, you can often go to the test publisher and request. A lot of the test publishers won't do it with you directly. They'll farm it out to a consultant or a
Yeah.
coach that they work with. But some of the tools that are useful and that have been around for quite a while, the strong interest inventory
Okay.
is one, and that's published by a company that used to be called CPP. They're now the Myers-Briggs company. But the strong interest inventory is a great, exactly what it sounds like, interest assessment when it comes to professional interests, hobbies, the types of people you like to work with. That's a great tool.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of Hogan assessment
Oh,
systems.
again, okay. That's one I had on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't remember it. I know some people in the space of family business really like the Hogan stuff or whatever.
Hogan's great. I've been using the Hogan tools since 2002. And
Okay.
they've been around since the 80s. And again,
Okay.
very rigorous development and continued and ongoing development. Another tool I really love is the emotional quotient inventory from a test publisher called Multi Health Systems. They're based in Toronto. They were really one of the first to the game in terms of emotional intelligence self-assessments. They also have 360 versions of the tool as well. And for your audience members that don't know what a 360 is,
Yeah.
as opposed to a self-assessment, it's a way of asking people to anonymously evaluate their perception of various skills. And the reason it's called a 360 is there are 360 degrees in a circle. And the idea is you want to get feedback from everybody around you. So it's a boss, a peer, a direct report, a parent, a sibling, whatever the case may be.
All right, let's talk about that for a minute then. So that whole
Sure.
360 thing, you know, has gotten a lot of traction in the corporate world with employee reviews, I think. And but you know, our smaller family-owned companies, our less sophisticated ones, I think they're definitely going to hear that word and be like, what the, you know, is that? And so who do you suggest that, let's just say it's little Jimmy, he's been in the business for a couple years and not sure where he wants, you know, is this right for me? Is this not right for me type of thing. Who should he involve and include in that 360 evaluation of himself?
Well, 360s tend to be more effective when the raters are people who have worked closely with that individual.
Yep.
And generally for a period of, I would say, a year or longer, and just have ongoing contact with that individual. I'll give you a quick story. I was working as a partner with an executive coach early on in my career, and I was the assessment guy because I had access to all these assessment tools, and we were working with a family-owned business. Dad was ready to transition the business to son number two, who had been working in the business for about a decade. And Dad was really looking forward to retire, construction company. And he wanted to do some management and leadership development for his son. He just thought it would be a good thing to do, but he was really ready to move on and transition the business to his son. So I suggested a 360. And in that 360, we certainly had Dad participate as his boss. We had people at the son's level in the organization participate.
Okay.
We had people who reported to the son because he was a manager. We had others, which in this case meant clients of the company, of the construction company.
Really? So even third parties?
Absolutely. Absolutely. As long as, again, there's ongoing contact with them and they have, you know, they can really comment on their skills.
Right. They're not just making it up. Yep.
We got back these results that said if Junior took over, half the company was going to exit because Dad had these rose-colored glasses on.
Okay, sure.
And was really looking forward to retirement. But he really thought Junior's ready. He can do it. It's going to be great. Who wouldn't love my son, right? It was a huge eye-opener for Dad. And it really forced him to really recalibrate his own retirement and who was going to lead the company in the short term.
How often do you use a 360 tool for those main family members that are those active involved in the company types?
Well, great question. Look, I'll say just about every client that I work with, I'll be doing some kind of assessment process with them.
Yeah.
Which will often just be a self-assessment, like the ones that I named earlier, you know, emotional intelligence, personality, values, and interests. The 360, less common for sure. If I had to wager a guess, I'd probably say maybe a third to half of the time I'm working with individuals, we're engaging others in a 360. Certainly when it comes to succession, but even when it comes to, you know, do I want to stay here?
Yeah.
So
I feel like sometimes there's a certain element of myself and other people too. Like we just sometimes want to be told what to do, or we want to be told what we're good at and not good at, or we want the confirmation of it at least. And I feel like that self-assessment, that 360 tool does exactly that. Like it probably, yeah, your son does suck, or you know, whatever it might be, or they are great and you're holding them back, or whatever it might be. I really love that idea. So is that mentioned in your book?
wow, I don't know if I've ever I've been asked that question. I believe I mentioned you know what? No, I don't think I do mention 360s actually in the book. Yeah. And I'm glad you're asking because I'm working on the third edition now. And I probably need to include that in there because it is incredibly valuable when it comes to succession decisions. But even, is this person an ongoing fit? Let's say they're in their 20s or 30s and
Yeah.
succession is still far off. But I'll say the other thing about it that's so useful is whether it's self-assessments or 360s, what I've noticed, because I have an HR corporate background
Yeah.
prior to working with family businesses, what I've noticed is that in so many family businesses, professional development, training in management and leadership is just neglected. It's just not even thought about. And so ongoing development and, like you're saying, feedback about what you're good at, where you're struggling, there's this huge absence of it. And so you've got next gens who are working at businesses who maybe never worked anywhere else, who don't really have a sense of, how am I contributing? How am I not contributing?
Yeah.
What am I doing? And having that 360 can be incredibly enlightening. And again, in a non-family setting, I think it's far more common for you to have whether it's a training and development department
Oh,
or
yeah.
at least some development going on.
Yeah, somebody's investing in you, knowing that they're gonna get a return of either this person turned out or this person sucks and we move on type of thing, and I agree with you, like, there's not nearly as much of that happens often in a family-owned company, with outside, third party or more intentional type of leadership development or whatever it might be.
Even just regular professional development. You don't
Yeah,
even have to be a manager or a leader, but just
yeah,
just professional development. And often, right, and you know this, in family businesses, it's even more about, well, what's the return on that investment, right? We have to be really careful with it. And sometimes it is really hard to quantify what you're getting from it. But once you've gone through it, you have a much better sense of who you are as an
yeah.
individual, and as a family member, you know what you can take advantage of in this person or
Oh,
not
yeah,
take advantage of.
yeah. No question about it. But I appreciate you mentioning that too.
Sure.
So if we go back to the book, yeah, I appreciate we went on this little tangent here with these 360 evaluations. I think that's really cool. Something I'm going to look into a little bit more with our own consulting work that we do with families. But back to the book and being trapped and, questions I can ask myself. That's where we got to. This is, you were talking about, what are my values? What are my strengths? What are my interests, et cetera, doing that kind of internal uh, diagnosis of yourself, and then potentially a 360 diagnosis as well. Is there other things that you would suggest to little Jimmy Jr., Sally Jr.?
I think talking to friends as much as you feel comfortable is critical, and just people you trust. Uh, what I've also found, and again, I'm sure this is something you've encountered, is that it's it the message often is, don't air your dirty laundry in public. And
Yeah.
so it's very difficult for family business members to know who to talk to, because the message has been beaten into you that this needs to stay in the family. Anything that you're not happy with, don't go elsewhere and talk about it, because it could hurt the business, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so your hands are often tied. And so it's also why I think that family business coaching really needs to be a term that people use a lot more of. I was shocked that, and I will tell you, I've worked with so many people individually to help them get their family to see the value of a family business consultant to
Sure.
come in, but it often takes a while for the family to get there, because again, they don't see the need for it. But it takes that kind of coaching of an individual to get the family there, because the family isn't necessarily like, oh yeah, this is absolutely what we need, and we're gonna spend that time and effort. So family business coaching, to me, needs to be a profession, a term, an idea
Yeah.
that is much more normalized than it is right now, rather than an add-on.
I like that. I appreciate that. That, is kind of a cheap infomercial for family business centers and our whole industry, of course. And I appreciate you mentioning that, because I do think,
Sure.
I grew up in a small family business as well. And I just remember, there's this whole identity. There's this, I don't want to say target, but there's this, you know, don't do something stupid because, uh, we, the public is our client. And as soon as, you do something stupid, they start going somewhere else for services or whatever it is, right?
Right.
And so then you feel that microscope a bit on yourself, and depending on who you are as an individual, you can really internalize that and really use that as a barrier to ever, I don't want to say seeking help, but certainly seeking any kind of ability to talk to somebody about what you might be experiencing, and especially on the negative side. And okay, great
And let
thought.
me just, if I could make an
Yeah,
additional point on that, people who do seek outside help, the first thing that often comes to mind, and because it's family and there's often conflict involved in family relationships, is a therapist, whether it's a psychologist or what have you. The problem is, and I've heard this from so many clients, and it just makes rational sense. Therapists they might be trained in family systems, but therapists don't go into that profession because they're necessarily interested in business or have any experience in business. And so just working with a therapist can address some things, but it really can't address a lot of the professional and the business side of things. On the other side of the spectrum is business coaches who I've had clients tell me they've reached out to, who have no training or experience in family dynamics or individual psychology. And so, I think this is why I certainly got hooked and really enjoy my work, because I feel like I'm pulling from my clinical training and my business experience with every client that I work with.
that's a great point. I feel like it can make it kind of hard for somebody who's potentially going to go look for some third party help to think about. I mean, there aren't a ton of unicorns out there like yourself that have both. There's a lot of the licensed therapists who have the, I don't I I guess lack of understanding on the business side, right? And then there's the other side of the coin where they don't have the other, and so what do you suggest for people who are trying to find a fit from that standpoint?
I think the good news there is that family business consulting firms, or even organizations that are really loose affiliations of family business consultants,
Yep.
often do have a mix of either some mental health training,
Yep.
or even if they come from a business background, they've had training with organizations like the Family Firm Institute and
Sure.
other ones that are really informed, I would say, by psychology, by professional psychology. And
Yeah.
so there are those people out there, but I will come back to my point about seeking somebody one-on-one, because if you're an individual and you're reaching out to a family business consulting firm, and
Yeah.
I don't I don't want to disparage them, because they're needed. And like I said, I'm often helping clients as a coach help their family see the need for a consultant. But when you
Yeah.
approach a family business consulting firm, their lens is often, we need everybody in the room.
Yeah.
And so again, I'm just going to come back to the idea of why family business coaching to me needs to be highlighted as its own distinct and really important profession. The people are out there. You just have to dig a little deeper or find those firms that have those coaches, or people like me that are out there that bring that combination. I'm far from being a unicorn. There are many of us out there. I'm in a peer supervision group with folks that have mental health training, but have worked in family as a family business consultant for many, many years, and
Yeah.
sought additional training and understand business, even if they never worked in business or human resources. So we are out there, but the customer, you have to be a really informed consumer in terms of what you're getting, and really clear about what you want.
Yep. And then so what are my biggest issues, and which type of trained advisor then do I need because of that? Okay.
Yeah. And
Um,
am I looking for somebody just for me? And if I am, what do I want to make sure their background and training is? Or
mhm.
am I looking for somebody that might be able to help my family, and maybe we can get there and we can use this person, but we're going to start with me. So
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously the way I mean, we have many family business members, but you know, within those families, there's often a champion, right? There's somebody who leans very much into these types of conversations and topics, and then is, unfortunately for them, probably always trying to pull along the rest of the family to show an interest, to see that this stuff matters, to whatever, you know, in hopeful advance of a problem coming along.
Let me, if I could, just give some color to that, because I think you're exactly right. There's often that person that kind of gets it and that knows that there needs to be better communication.
Yeah.
There need to be family meetings. There needs to be maybe even a family constitution, or maybe they're doing some reading and learning about it. But what they don't have necessarily, and again, this is why I keep coming back to the idea of family business coaching, they don't necessarily have somebody on the outside who can really behind the scenes partner with them and help them strategize as to how do you bring the family around? How do you get them to that point? I mean, I've worked with clients sometimes over a period of several years to help them very carefully and strategically bring their family around, empower other members of the family to own that this is important. And just one very practical example of that is trying to get family members to attend a family business conference. That's a wonderful way to initiate it, or to go to a family business center presentation, right?
So they can see more than just what their own family member is trying to drag them into, but they can see that other people share this importance of these topics, that they share this common experiences and problems, need for solutions, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's absolutely true. Yeah, if you just have them read an article or a book, sometimes it just isn't as, you know, it doesn't create that, okay, I see it now, other people see it, I don't want to miss it type of thing that I think a family champion needs to create for those other family members. So.
Absolutely. And you mentioned succession earlier. I think succession is a great example of when you really need other people to show dad or mom that you can exit, you can think this through, here's how to do it. And yes, it's a struggle to exit a family business for many, many people. So I've worked with so many clients, and again, strategizing behind the scenes to introduce somebody to dad or mom who's also in the midst of succession, or who has left a family business and created a new wonderful chapter for themselves. Because Junior telling mom or dad, here's what you need to do and here's what you need to think about, that's a pretty heavy lift. But right?
Yeah.
But the next generation can indirectly put things in front of mom or dad, so mom and dad can discover on their own that this is maybe something they need to think about more, take action on more, and that they can do successfully.
Yep. All right, great. So back to being trapped in, you're the trapped in the family business guy, for lack of a better branding for you.
No one's ever said that, and I love that, by the way. So thank you for saying that.
All right. Well, yeah. You're the trapped guy. You're the, you know, I think the cover has a dude with like rope around him or something like that. Anyway,
That's right.
how do we know that's become us? How do we what are some of the signs that that is who I am, or that's who my sibling is, or that's who my cousin is, or that's who my old man is, and he did this for 30 years and he hates his life, and I don't want that from me. I don't know. Is there anything you can do?
Let me approach it lightly at first, and then not so lightly.
Okay.
The light version is, if you find yourself Googling family business misery or depressed in the family business,
that's your sign.
That's a good sign, right?
Okay. All right.
On the darker side, unfortunately, I've had clients who, after their second or third DUI, have worked with therapists and are starting to wonder, there's something else going on here. What is it? And they'll stumble across the book or the title of the book, or they'll get referred to me from somebody, and they'll realize, oh, I'm numbing myself because either, I mean, there are lots of reasons people numb themselves, right? But or escape, because I'm not satisfied, because I never really wanted to be here, because I don't know who I am and what I want to do, or
Yeah.
because the conflict is so great that, and I don't know how to handle it.
I don't want to deal
I
with it.
just need to escape. Unfortunately, and I believe there are several studies that now support this, addiction, the prevalence of addiction in family businesses is higher than in the general population.
Really?
Yeah.
You know what? I think when you say that, the cynic in me, which is huge, is probably almost as fat as I am, but like is just like why do they, because you look at the outside, from the outside, you see these people in this family business and you think they got it made. Like the things that you talked about earlier about why you might move into a family business. Some of them are negative, obligation and guilt, but some of them are very positive. Like I never have to write a resume. I never have to qualify for anything. I get paid more than I should. No one's gonna fire me. Those types of things are what I think an uneducated person for sure, from the outside sees in this poor dude who's wrapped in rope in the family business. Like they don't see that negative side of it. And I feel like it's important to remind everybody that that is a real thing, and that money doesn't cure everything, and eventually, your emotions are gonna win out or whatever. I don't know if you know what I'm saying here, but
I really appreciate everything you're saying for so many reasons. One, I just want to affirm that when a family business is humming, right? When you're actively working uh, on the family and on the business, right? When you have things in place to support new family members coming in and make sure things are dealt with, and you've got systems and processes, there's nothing like it. There's absolutely nothing like it. And I've worked with enough clients at this point that I realized that, well, gosh, I missed out. I never got to see my parents working up close, and they never
yeah,
got to see me working up close. And the bonds that I've seen among family members who get to see that other side of them. I mean, it's well, it's like being on, the experience that people have being on a sports team, right?
sure,
The victories that you have together, or serving in the military. People come back from that and they can't recreate the intensity of relationships and the feeling alive in a way that I don't think you necessarily feel alive if you don't have that level of intimacy with people.
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
it's remarkable. But to your second point, and I got to tell you, when I've presented for family business centers or other organizations, I've had the reaction or the comment of trapped in the family business. Oh, that's so negative. We don't want to be negative. Yuck. And I do feel like I've had to kind of fight against, but it's real. And just acknowledging it doesn't mean you're enabling it or building it or victimizing or subscribing to a victim mentality. It means you're acknowledging something that's challenging and difficult, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to exit. It doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't answers, that you're trapped forever. It's solvable. But you have to acknowledge just what you're saying, that it can be complicated, it can be negative, it can be hard. And like the example I gave, people can turn to substance abuse as a way to escape.
Sure.
So there needs to be an acknowledgement of the reality. And as much as I love positive psychology, and I really think it's helpful, saying that there aren't things that are difficult and challenging and negative is really problematic to me.
Okay. Okay. I'm glad we covered that too.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, so back to the book, you've kind of compared working in the family business to an arranged marriage, which for most Americans, not all, but most Americans, is a bit of not a foreign concept, but it's a concept that they're not going to experience firsthand for sure. I mean, we hear about what an arranged marriage is, or we see it described in movies or pop culture or wherever it might be. and it usually looks like something we don't want to be a part of, frankly. Or I don't know, not always maybe, but most of the time, it's focused on this. Oh, we're not together because of love. We're together because of X, Y, and Z other things, right? Which
Well,
just,
and if you think about it, I mean, arranged marriages in so many cultures, it's designed to benefit the family, right? I mean, that's the context.
yeah,
Parents are trying to figure out who are we going to find for our child that will benefit us,
right. We need to
right?
marry
Not
up.
just our child. So,
Yeah,
so
right. Yeah, yeah, there's some selfish components to it. Yeah, which, and then in the business, you got the same thing, what family members do we bring in here that are going to benefit the business? But, um, so when you think about that metaphor of the arranged marriage concept, in that case, you're not really left with any, to my knowledge anyway. Most of the time, that's your marriage. Like that's who you're stuck with. In the family business, you've got options, potentially anyway, and maybe you don't think you do, but I think your book is probably written in a way to tell them that they do have options, or that they do have um, exit opportunities, off ramps of different types. And you know, when you're working with somebody who does feel that trappedness and needs out or thinks they need out, what do you give them for ideas of choices, of paths to consider, of that kind of thing? And I think that'd be helpful for our audience too, to just think about, well, yeah, I am trapped in this family business, Michael, but I'm getting paid good, and what else do I have available to me? I'm just going to keep going down this path because it's now my routine, it's my norm, it's even though it sucks, it's comfortable at some level. I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying? So what are our options? Because no, I fear change, so what is your coaching to these folks involved from that standpoint?
well, let me just first preface it by saying often people, because of the title of the book, and maybe even my background, assume that the work that I do is always helping people exit the business. And that is not at all where I'm coming from. Again,
Okay.
the reason I wrote the book is to identify a feeling that is incredibly common and to say, you
Yeah.
can do something about it. I want to say that roughly, I really, right down the middle, half of my clients exit, maybe short term or long term, and half stay and either change their perspective or bring the family around to creating some structure or bringing in a family business consultant, something like that. So it's really not just because you feel trapped doesn't mean you have to literally escape the family business. But if you are at a point,
That's a great point.
yeah, yeah.
That's a
Did you
great
want,
point.
yeah,
I'm just thinking about that with some of the folks in our network and our families that, like, I'm trapped and how do I escape? They might be thinking this book is going to help them figure out how to save face with their family through their escape process, or something of that nature. But what you're just saying there is actually that you're trapped, but there's ways to make the environment better. There's ways to make yourself more adaptable to what's going on. There's communication and governance and all kinds of other things that can be extremely helpful to just turn that trapped feeling into something else and keep you in the business and keep you and make you enjoy it, right? So I appreciate you mentioning that first.
and we can't not say that, we can't ignore the fact that family business centers are a huge resource for helping people shift and get out of that feeling of there's nothing I could do. The only thing I could do is leave or be miserable.
Yep.
Well, that's quite the spectrum, right? There's a lot of middle ground there. You don't necessarily have to leave or be miserable. So, my pitch was with the book and is with my clients that this needs to be done in a very comprehensive and thoughtful way. So if you're going to leave, let's make sure that that's the best decision for you right now. And do it in a way that makes sense for you and that you're leaving towards something else purposefully, right? And thoughtfully and intentionally. And if you're going to stick it out, let's figure out what that looks like and what impact you can have, because often it's a feeling of powerless that people have in when they are feeling trapped. I mean, by definition, right? If you're trapped,
Right.
somebody else is keeping you there.
Correct.
When in fact, my argument is you can feel trapped and not at all be trapped.
Sure.
You have options.
I think that, and I think that's what, yeah, folks need. So, what are a couple of those options as we close up here? What are a couple of those options that you've seen work for individuals that maybe come to you with that whole, my life sucks type of thing because I'm trapped here?
Let me say, at the end of some kind of process with people, and it may be a few conversations, it may be a few months of work, it may be even a few years of work together. I've had clients who have opted to leave the business but stay in the industry.
Okay.
And not necessarily work for a competitor, but maybe work for somebody else, if locally, who's in the same industry, some kind of vertical or something,
Yeah.
something like that. I've had clients that never, and I'm sure you've seen this because it is so incredibly common, people who've never worked elsewhere or never lived elsewhere. And so I've had clients who decide, I'm going to move. You know what? I'm going to get out of here where my family name isn't necessarily, or where my last name isn't associated with a business. And I'm going to forge my own path somewhere else and figure out what part of my network I can use to maybe find an opportunity or how to do a job search. And, sometimes I certainly will refer people to resume writers or to people that, headhunters can help folks with that. But it doesn't necessarily mean starting from scratch, but certainly, so staying in the industry, moving to a different geography can be certainly helpful. But again, for me, the underlying and the most important part of it is that it needs to be thoughtful. It needs to be comprehensive. The worst thing you could do is get to a point where you're like reacting and acting from a place of really intense feeling. The feelings have to be taken into account, but rationality has to prevail. These need to be thoughtful decisions that people make.
Okay. So, you gave us a couple ideas there that I would say are kind of either short or long-term actually exits from the business. What are some shorter, long-term action steps that maybe keep me in the business? I'm assuming one of them is going to be, getting a third party involved or something like that. But could you kind of give us a couple of those ideas too?
Sure. I just had a call yesterday with a brand new client who really just needs to work out a relationship with one of his siblings. There are other siblings involved. There are parents involved, but he was ready to exit because of one sibling. Something needs to happen between the two of them, but he was about to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And in this case, it was potentially estranging himself from his whole family. So sometimes it's a third party to just work on one relationship or have a difficult discussion or find the inner strength to have those conversations even without a facilitator. I mean, I always, when it's complicated and emotional, I think it's always great to have a third party there. But even if not, just having those difficult conversations, I think looking into changing positions or changing your role, doing different things in the family business can be a wonderful way to kind of do a reset if you want to stay. I think even just having, if there's a degree of trust and comfort, having conversations with, if parents are still involved in the business, with them about, I'm not really happy, I'm not really satisfied. And just approaching it very gently and very openly. The problem is it feels like such a Pandora's box to so many people to even, right, to even utter those words that I'm not happy. But if you do have that conversation, it needs to happen in the context of, I'm not saying I'm out the door, dad or mom. I'm not saying I don't want to be here. I feel like I need help because I'm not doing as well as I know I could. And that could be, again, professionally in terms of development, that could be emotionally, but I think it takes a lot of courage and a lot of bravery to have those conversations. But if there is trust and if you can give it some time, just telling somebody in the family that things aren't going well for you can be huge.
All right. It does take a lot of, guts, for lack of a better word, to do that. How do we then, let's say we're on the other side of that coin, that we're Jimmy Senior or Sally Senior, whatever. We're the current gen or the outgoing gen or whatever. How do we make sure that we're providing an environment where our kids, grandkids, nephews, nieces, whoever it might be, can share issues of being trapped, or can have opportunities that make them less prone to be trapped?
Yeah. Look, on a very basic level, I think it's very, very simple.
Okay, good.
It's it's asking the question. It's being open to whatever that family member is going to say. But the question is, how are you doing?
Okay.
How are you feeling about your job? How are you feeling about the business? What's going on for you? And so, it often works from the other direction, right? It can take a lot of courage and bravery for a parent or a sibling to ask that question, because you might get back things that you don't want to hear, or you don't know what to do with. But
Correct.
but that, to me, is the simplest and most profound thing that you can do, is ask the question. And I would say keep asking the question.
Okay. Right, because the first couple times you might get the gloss over BS answer or whatever, well, you don't really want to know, so I'm just going to tell you what you want to hear type of answer, right? Okay.
All good, Dad. All good. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah. Right.
Well, and then the follow-up is,
Everybody's
well,
fine.
right. The follow-up is, okay, how is it good? Tell me what you enjoy. Well, I was talking to
I like that.
right, right.
Because now we're putting poor little Jimmy on the spot to say, okay, yeah, is there something here I like? Or, okay, you got me. I hate this freaking place and I need to tell you why. Yeah, okay,
Right.
great.
Hey, I'm glad to hear you're happy. So tell me, what do you like? What's good about being here?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I feel like that's a process of questioning that even has a name for it, like where you're just, you keep asking why, or you keep asking a question back until you actually get to a place where they're really giving you what you wanted in the first place.
absolutely.
Okay.
So asking that question, I think, is just is tremendous. And I was talking to a colleague yesterday about how, and I think this is this need is increasing over time. Look, there's always been training and an understanding that listening skills are important, but we've become a culture and a society of 30-second sound bites, of TikTok, of overstimulation, of constant stimulation, that's sitting and being. And it's a corny expression, but we're not human doings, we're human beings. I don't know if you've ever heard that one before.
I have not, but I'm writing it down.
Isn't it a good one? I love
I
it.
love it, man.
I wish I could take credit for it.
Okay.
But I think there's a real need for what I've been calling, and I'm sure what others have called well before me, deep listening. People need to want to be heard and understood and connected. I mean, you can't open a newspaper or look at a website without hearing about how isolated we're becoming and how lonely we feel and how it's skyrocketed since COVID. But I think the need existed, and we were on this path long before that. So carving out time, whether it's with a family member, with a spouse, with a sibling, or hiring a coach to do some deep listening, because often I have a friend who this has to do with a personality style also, but I use his quote all the time. He said to me, how do I know what I think until I say it? And sometimes you just gotta blather on and find a place where you could just almost play and explore and see what your mind has to offer and what words come out of your mouth. And it takes effort to find the person who can do that with you, who's willing to do that with you. And it takes, again, courage and bravery to be willing to just talk, frankly, without a whole lot of intentionality, without a whole lot of goal orientation, other than I'm going to try to express myself and
Yeah.
sit with it.
And that's something that we just don't, like, as you already said, we don't do enough of that. Sometimes we don't do any of that. So I've been speaking with Michael Klein. He's the author of Trapped in the Family Business. And just this conversation today has been great for me to, I've written down several things here, of course, and things that I think I can pass on to families that we work with here at our center, et cetera, and things for myself as well. The whole concept of deep listening, of verbalizing our thoughts, getting them out there into the universe, helping us kind of sift through what's real, what's not, and what are we truly thinking about right now, or how are we feeling? Something that we just don't take enough time to do. Anything that you'd want to kind of give us as we part here today, Michael?
I appreciate the question. I want to invite your listeners to consider attending a free monthly family business roundtable that I facilitate online. I established it with some former clients. We've been running for a couple of years now. It's called Family Business Anonymous. And the reason that we put it into place was we wanted a place for people who don't necessarily want to disclose who they are, what industry they're in. Again, for all the reasons we talked about, it can be really taboo to talk about your family or your struggles outside of the family business.
Yeah.
So we have this Zoom call set up that's free. Again, it's once a month. We have participants from all over the world who've jumped on the call, and we'll talk about any topic that's related to either joining or being in or exiting a family business. What I particularly love about this structure that we've set up is people can sign on. They don't have to show video. We don't have to see their faces. They don't have to talk. We don't know who it is, but they can listen in and they can find, hopefully, some comfort or some ideas or whatever, just from being a fly on the wall, so to speak. And so if you go to familybusinessanonymous.com, familybusinessanonymous.com, the Zoom link is there. It's the second Tuesday of every month from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern. And I really just want to invite anybody who's listening to this, who's involved in a family business, to please come, even if you don't want to talk, disclose your name, disclose your face, just feel free to stop in and see if there's anything that you can get from it.
I'm glad that you mentioned that. I have often said, that when I tell people about our peer groups, I say it's kind of like Alcoholics Anonymous for family businesses. And so you've actually taken it one step further to just simply call it that and then do that. We're going to include this in our next newsletter. Try to run this out there on LinkedIn and a couple other places, because I've never seen someone do this. There are peer groups all over the place. And but this one is unique in its anonymity, which I got through that word, even though I went to public school. But I love it, and I'm gonna put that out there, because frankly, if I was in a family-owned company, I wouldn't want to sit around with people who I might see or otherwise interact with or whatever. But I would go into a room with my camera turned off and my name changed to Stan or whatever it is, and take a listen and ask some questions and see where it got me. And I bet that I would really find value in that. So I appreciate you mentioning it. Appreciate you being on with us today, Michael. This is awesome.
It's been an honor to be here. I appreciate I appreciate your interest in having me here. And this was just a wonderful conversation. So Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Never Go Against the Family, a podcast produced by the University of Northern Iowa Family Business Center. You can find more information about the center, membership, and upcoming events at unifamilybusinesscenter.com. As Vito Corleone advises, never go against the family.